A single man steps behind a heavy woven veil into almost total darkness. How blood was used to remove it. The stain of Israel's rebellion has soaked into the sacred architecture of the tabernacle. It requires a powerful ritual solvent to break it down. In the biblical system, that requires blood. But once the impurity is extracted from the furniture, it still exists. It has to be physically carried out of the community. That requires a living vehicle. One animal cannot do both. A dead goat cannot walk into the desert. A living goat cannot supply the blood needed to scrub the mercy seat. So Aaron divides the ritual. The lot falls. The goat for Yahweh is slaughtered. Aaron collects the blood, picks up his censer of coals, and turns back toward the heavy veil. He does not step through the veil with the blood. Not yet. If he walks into the Holy of Holies, and his eyes make direct contact with the localized glory resting on the Ark of the Covenant, he will die. The unshielded reality of God is too intense for a human frame, and why it took two very different animals to solve a problem that threatened the survival of an entire nation. So before Aaron brings the remedy, he has to build a shield. He takes a censer, fills it with burning coals from the bronze altar, and grabs 2 handfuls of finely ground, sweet incense. He slips behind the heavy curtain. It is almost completely dark. He drops the incense onto the burning coals. Instantly, a thick, fragrant smoke fills the confined space. The text is very clear about what this does. The cloud of incense covers the mercy seat, the solid gold lid of the ark, so that he may not die. It is a literal smokescreen. To understand why this day was so terrifying, you have to look at the first verse of Leviticus 16, a temporary atmospheric wall between the fragility of a human being and the consuming fire of the Creator. Now he can bring the blood. He steps back out, retrieves the bowl of his own bull's blood, and returns to the smoke-filled room. He dips his finger and sprinkles it on the front of the mercy seat on the east side, and then 7 times in front of it. 7, the biblical number of total completion. He perfectly decontaminates the space for himself. Then he goes back out, slaughters the first goat, and does the exact same thing with its blood for the nation. This is the absolute climax of the ritual. The chapter begins with a memory of sudden death, and it is the moment modern readers misunderstand the most. If you grew up in a modern religious culture, you probably look at this blood and see a transaction. You might assume the goat was punished instead of the people. You might think the blood is a visual bribe handed over to satisfy the anger of an offended deity. But look at what the text actually says. Leviticus 16 verse 16. Thus he shall make atonement for the holy place, because of the uncleannesses of the people of Israel, and because of their transgressions, all their sins. The blood is not applied to the people. It is not handed to God like a check to pay a debt. It is applied to the furniture. In the biblical system, blood does not represent death. Aaron, the high priest, had 2 sons. Their names were Nadab and Abihu. It represents life. Leviticus 17 will explicitly state that the life of the creature is in the blood. When Israel sins, they release the forces of death, decay, and fracture into the camp. That pollution flies inward. It accumulates on the tabernacle, staining the golden architecture of the Holy of Holies. The blood of a flawless, unpolluted animal is the ultimate counteragent. It is liquid life. When Aaron sprinkles it onto the mercy seat, he is not paying a fine. He is applying a high-grade ritual detergent to a lethal spiritual stain. Life swallows death. Earlier in the book, they brought unauthorized fire before the Lord. The blood absorbs the impurity. It scrubs the absolute center of the Israelite universe back to its original sterile condition. The throne is clean. God can stay, but Aaron is not done. The center is decontaminated, but the rest of the facility is still saturated. Aaron is standing behind the veil. The mercy seat is clean. The radioactive center of the camp is secure. But the contamination did not just hit the center. It soaked into everything. So Aaron begins to move backward. The text does not give us a long theological explanation of their specific error. It just gives us the result. He steps out from behind the heavy curtain, leaving the thick cloud of incense behind, and enters the main room of the sanctuary, the holy place. And he repeats the entire decontamination sequence. The text dictates that he must make atonement for the tent of meeting, just as he did for the inner shrine, wiping down the intermediate zone where the priests operate every single day. He is literally sweeping the invisible accumulation of death out of the structure from the inside out. Think about the spatial logic. He is pushing the impurity away from the throne, out of the darkness, into the intermediate room, and finally, out into the bright daylight of the courtyard. His hands are covered in red. His white linen garments are undoubtedly stained. He takes the remaining blood, the combined mixture from his own bull and the slaughtered goat, and walks to the great bronze altar. This is the massive metal structure in the courtyard where normal daily sacrifices happen. He smears the liquid life on the horns of the altar, pressing it onto all four corners, and sprinkles it with his finger 7 times. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. They died on the spot, right in front of the sanctuary. 7. The biblical rhythm of total completion. The outer boundary is now scrubbed. Leviticus explicitly says he does this to cleanse it and to consecrate it from the uncleannesses of the people of Israel. The architecture is safe. The golden furniture is wiped down. The spatial threat is neutralized. God's localized presence will not have to evacuate the camp. But there is a massive, lingering problem. The ritual detergent worked. The blood successfully absorbed the stain. But that means the collected rebellion, idolatry, and impurity of hundreds of thousands of people has now been extracted and concentrated into a single mass. It has not simply evaporated into thin air. It has been pulled out of the sacred walls and gathered right at the doorway of the tent. It still exists. It still has weight. And if it stays inside the borders of Israel, the cycle of danger will immediately begin again. That event casts a long shadow over everything that follows. It has to be physically carried completely out of the human domain. Aaron turns away from the bronze altar. He walks back toward the entrance, and he looks at the second goat. Aaron approaches the living goat, the one marked for the wasteland. He does not hold a knife. This animal is not going to bleed. Its purpose is entirely different from the first. Instead, Aaron does something highly physical. Leviticus 16 dictates that he must lay both of his hands on the head of the live goat. In the normal daily sacrificial system, when an Israelite brings an offering, they place one hand on the animal. It is a gesture of identification. It says, "This animal represents me." But here, the text is uniquely specific, both hands. And the Hebrew verb used for this action, samach, does not mean a gentle symbolic tap. It means to lean heavily, to brace yourself against something, to transfer physical weight. Aaron is pressing down. He is pushing the weight of his upper body onto the skull of the animal, because it establishes the baseline reality of the Israelite camp. And as he holds it there, he begins to speak. He confesses over the animal all the iniquities of the people of Israel and all their transgressions, all their sins. Look at that vocabulary: iniquity, transgression, sin. The Hebrew text is not just being poetic or repetitive. It is deliberately piling up every conceivable category of human failure: crookedness, willful rebellion, accidental failure, treason. Nothing is left out. The entire spectrum of human darkness is vocalized out loud in the courtyard. Outside the tabernacle curtains, the camp is entirely silent. Leviticus requires the entire nation to fast on this day, to deny themselves. No one is working, no fires are burning. An entire society has stopped to wait for the outcome of this ritual. And as Aaron speaks in the quiet courtyard, a structural transfer takes place. The text explicitly says he puts them on the head of the goat. The concept is startlingly literal. The concentrated toxic waste of the nation, the accumulated spiritual pollution of roughly 2 million people, is funneled down through the arms of the high priest and packed into the body of a single living creature. The animal is no longer just a goat. It is the physical carrier of death. It is the embodiment of Israel's broken covenant. If that goat stays in the courtyard, the tabernacle remains polluted. If it breaks loose and wanders back into the tents of the Israelites, the contamination goes right back into the community. It has to be exiled. Aaron releases his grip. He steps back from the animal, and he hands the lead rope to a designated handler who has been standing by, waiting for this exact moment. He carries a pan of burning coals, a handful of crushed incense, and a bowl of blood. They are a flawed, mortal, bleeding, failing group of human beings. The handler takes the rope. He turns his back on the bronze altar and begins to walk. Every step he takes pulls the accumulated weight of Israel's rebellion further away from the localized presence of God. He leads the animal out of the courtyard. He walks out through the rows of tents, moving through a completely silent fasting camp. Imagine the sensory reality of that moment. Hundreds of thousands of people standing quietly in the desert heat, watching a single animal walk past their families, carrying the physical reality of their own treason, their own violence, their own failures. The handler crosses the outer boundary of the camp. He steps out into the wasteland, and he keeps walking. Leviticus dictates that he must take the animal to a solitary land. The Hebrew word is midbar, the wilderness. In the modern world, we tend to think of the wilderness as a peaceful escape, a nature preserve. But in the ancient biblical imagination, the wilderness is the exact opposite. It is the anti-Eden. The tabernacle, with its woven flowers, pomegranates, and golden tree-like lampstand, is a miniaturized garden of life and order. The wilderness is the realm of thorns, scorpions, thirst, and chaos. It is the land of anti-creation. It is the domain of Azazel. The handler walks until the camp is completely out of sight. He does not build an altar in the sand. He does not slaughter the animal to appease some desert demon. He simply stops. He takes off the rope, and he lets the goat wander away alive into the desolation. And they are living geographically wrapped around the localized, manifest presence of the creator of the universe. Think about the mechanism of what is actually happening. The sin of the nation is not destroyed. It is returned. It is sent back into the chaos from which it originally came. It is entirely severed from the covenant community. This fundamentally changes how we understand biblical forgiveness. For an ancient Israelite, sin is not just a ledger of debts that God politely agrees to cancel. It is a lethal, active contaminant. If it stays inside your borders, it will eventually force the source of life to leave. It has to be forcibly removed. It has to be carried so far away that it can never find its way back to your door. When the Psalms later declare, "As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us," that is not a poetic metaphor. That is the physical geography of Leviticus 16. The blood of the first goat scrubbed the sacred architecture clean. But the legs of the second goat carried the disease out of the quarantine zone. Both actions are absolutely required. You cannot have biblical atonement without both decontamination and exile, cleansing and removal. The goat disappears into the dust. The handler turns around and begins the long walk back. The danger has been expelled, but the Day of Atonement is not over. The high priest is still standing in the courtyard, wearing the blood-stained white garments of a servant, and the camp has to be brought back to life. Aaron steps back into the tent of meeting. He strips off the blood-stained white linen garments. That proximity is not safe. It is like building a residential neighborhood around an exposed nuclear reactor. And he leaves them there. He does not take them back outside. They have done their job. They have absorbed the lethal reality of the day, and they are left behind. The text dictates that Aaron must wash his entire body with water in a holy place. And then he puts the gold back on. He puts on the ephod of blue and scarlet yarn. He puts on the breastpiece of 12 precious stones. He restores the visual image of glory. He walks back out into the bright light of the courtyard and offers the final burnt offerings, one for himself and one for the nation. Smoke rises from the bronze altar. The men who handled the exiled goat and the animal remains wash their clothes and re-enter the camp. The fast is broken. The reset is complete. The power at the center is entirely good. It is the absolute source of life. The tabernacle is clean. The toxic accumulation of a year of human failure has been scrubbed from the architecture and exiled to the wasteland. The threat of annihilation is paused. For one more year, the absolute consuming reality of God's holiness can dwell in the exact center of a flawed, bleeding, mortal community without destroying them. That is what atonement meant to an ancient Israelite. It was not an abstract legal concept. It was survival, and it is the baseline for everything that comes later. When you understand this physical, spatial protocol, the New Testament claims about what happened on a Roman cross suddenly stop looking like a courtroom transaction. When the author of Hebrews looks back at Leviticus 16, he does not use the language of a judge and a ledger. He uses the language of architecture and blood. He argues that Jesus did not enter a tent made by human hands. He did not carry the blood of bulls and goats. But if the containment protocols fail, that same power will annihilate everything it touches. He carried his own life into the ultimate, unmediated Holy of Holies to scrub the stain of human rebellion permanently. And like that second goat, he did not die at the center of the religious establishment. He was led outside the camp. He carried the concentrated weight of human transgression outside the city gates, exiled into the darkness, cut off from the land of the living so that the community could survive. Cleansing and removal. The throne is safe, and the wilderness has swallowed the disease. The story of atonement in Leviticus is the story of a single man stepping behind a heavy woven veil in total darkness, terrified that he might not survive the room. The story of the New Testament is that the veil has been torn entirely in half. The space is clean, the presence is open, and the toxic weight you could not carry has been carried away. So God tells Moses to warn Aaron, if this video helped you see the biblical text in a new way, the biggest thing you can do is subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who needs it. That is genuinely how people find this channel and how we keep making these deep dives. Thank you for watching. Please keep us in your prayers, and God bless you. Do not come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. He cannot walk in casually. He cannot walk in whenever he wants. The approach must be highly regulated. It requires a sequence of actions that must be executed flawlessly. And it can only happen on Yom Kippur. the Day of Atonement. But before we look at the blood, we have to understand the disease. We have to understand what it was that made the sanctuary so dangerous in the first place. It is the 10th day of the 7th month. He is the only human being allowed to stand in this room, and he is only allowed to do it once a year. When modern people hear the words sin or impurity, we tend to think in legal terms. We think of a courtroom, a broken rule, a spiritual demerit recorded on an invisible ledger. And that makes sense to us because that is how modern justice works. If you break a law, you have a bad record. If you pay the fine or serve the time, your record is cleared. The problem is entirely abstract. But if you want to understand Leviticus, you have to completely abandon that mental model. In the ancient biblical imagination, human rebellion and ritual impurity are not just abstract ideas, they have mass, they have a physical dimension, they operate like airborne pathogens or toxic waste. When an Israelite sins, or when they contract severe ritual impurity, like coming into contact with a corpse, which is the ultimate symbol of death, the effect does not just stay contained to that one person. It goes airborne, it travels, and it magnetically attaches itself to the most sacred object in the vicinity, the tabernacle. The sanctuary sits in the exact center of the Israelite camp. It acts like a giant spiritual carbon filter or a sponge. Every day, it absorbs the toxic fallout of the nation's behavior. A camp of roughly 2 million people. They lie, they steal, they harbor bitterness, they deal with disease and death. If you ask a modern reader what this man is doing with that blood, you will almost always get the same answer. And even when they bring individual sacrifices throughout the year to handle their specific wrongs, the ambient pollution of human mortality and rebellion continues to build up. The tabernacle was a stunning piece of architecture. It was constructed of hammered gold, polished silver, and finely twisted linen in blue, purple, and scarlet. But by the time the calendar rolled around to the 10th day of the 7th month, in the textual reality of Leviticus, that beautiful tent was coated in a thick, invisible layer of grime. It was saturated, and that creates a structural crisis. God is holy. He is the absolute, uncompromised source of life. He cannot and will not dwell permanently in a space that is entirely polluted by death and moral decay. The two realities repel each other. If the contamination reaches critical mass, the holy presence of God will be forced to evacuate the tent. This is not a hypothetical threat. Later in the Bible, the prophet Ezekiel will actually watch this happen in a vision. He will see the glory of God physically lift off the cherubim and abandon the temple in Jerusalem because the idolatry and violence of the people had made the space uninhabitable. They will say he is paying a penalty. They will say he is offering a transaction to change God's mind. If God leaves, the covenant is broken, the protection is gone, the nation is completely exposed. So the Day of Atonement is not just a polite religious ceremony, it is an emergency intervention. It is the one day of the year when the high priest must enter the most dangerous zone on earth and scrub the facility clean. But to do that, he cannot walk in wearing his normal clothes. For 364 days a year, the high priest is the most visually stunning human being in the Israelite camp. He normally wears a breastpiece set with 12 precious stones, each engraved with the name of an Israelite tribe. He wears a woven ephod of gold, blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. He wears a robe fringed with golden bells that chime when he walks, and a golden plate across his forehead that reads, "Holy to the Lord." He is the living, breathing emblem of national glory. But not today. But if you read the actual instructions in Leviticus 16, that is not what the text says he is doing. He is not paying a debt. He is cleaning a physical space. Leviticus 16 commands Aaron to completely dismantle that image. Before he can touch the blood that will clean the sanctuary, he has to strip. He takes off the gold, he takes off the jewels, he takes off the colors. The text says he must wash his entire body in water, complete physical vulnerability. Then he puts on 4 specific items: a linen tunic, linen undergarments, a linen sash, a linen turban. Look at that fabric, plain white linen. This is a massive demotion. White linen is the dress of a common servant. When Aaron walks into the absolute unmediated presence of the Creator, he leaves his human status at the door. In the throne room of God, the highest religious authority on earth is reduced to a basic laborer. But the imagery goes deeper. In the ancient world and in later Jewish tradition, plain white linen is not just for servants. It is what you use to wrap a corpse. Aaron is about to step into the exact space where his 2 sons were incinerated by divine fire. Biblical atonement is fundamentally spatial. It is a massive, dangerous decontamination protocol required to scrub the sanctuary of accumulated human impurity. He is walking into the radioactive center of God's holiness. By stripping away his glory and putting on plain linen, he is essentially dressing for his own funeral. He is acknowledging that he has no innate right to survive the room he is about to enter. And that brings him to the first animal. Before Aaron can do anything for the nation of Israel, he has to deal with himself. He brings a young bull. But this bull is not for the people. The text is highly specific. It is for himself and for his house. Aaron is a human being. He lives in the camp. He sins. He carries the ambient pollution of the community just like anyone else. You cannot scrub a sterile surgical room if your own hands are covered in bacteria. If Aaron walks behind the veil carrying his own unatoned impurity, the localized presence of God will react to it. So he slaughters the bull. He makes atonement for his own family. He neutralizes the threat of his own humanity. Only now, washed, stripped of his status, wrapped in white, and covered by the blood of his own sacrifice, is he qualified to act as an agent for the nation. We are going to trace the exact sequence of this ritual step by step, from the outer courtyard to the absolute center of the Holy of Holies. He leaves the bull for a moment and turns back to the courtyard. 2 animals are waiting for him at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the fate of the entire camp is about to depend on a terrifying game of chance. Aaron steps out into the light of the courtyard. Waiting for him at the entrance of the tent of meeting are 2 male goats. They are not 2 separate sacrifices. The text of Leviticus treats them as a single, unified offering. They work together to solve a problem that one animal cannot solve alone. Aaron stands between them. He casts lots over the animals. He is making a physical, randomized binary choice, a 50-50 split. One lot is designated for Yahweh, the Lord. The other is inscribed with a word that appears nowhere else in the entire Hebrew Bible, for Azazel. What does that word mean? If you read a traditional English Bible, you will probably see the word scapegoat. But that is a 16th century invention by the translator William Tyndale, who was trying to explain what the goat actually did. In the ancient Hebrew text, Azazel operates almost like a proper noun. It points to a destination, a desolate region, or, in some ancient Jewish traditions, a figure of the wasteland. We are going to see what impurity actually does to sacred ground. Whatever the exact etymological root, the spatial meaning in the ritual is clear. Azazel is the anti-tabernacle. It is the realm of chaos, thorns, and death outside the boundaries of the camp. Aaron places the lots on the heads of the animals. 2 identical goats, 2 completely different trajectories. The goat designated for Yahweh will not survive the hour. It is going to be slaughtered, and its blood will be taken deeper into the sanctuary than any other sacrifice all year. The goat designated for Azazel will survive the knife. It will be kept alive, standing by the altar, waiting for the end of the ceremony. Why do you need both? Because the biblical problem of impurity has two distinct dimensions. It stains and it accumulates. Think about a hazardous chemical spill on the floor of a house. You have two separate problems. First, you have to use a harsh solvent to scrub the toxin out of the wood. But second, you have to take the soaked, toxic rag outside and throw it in the incinerator. If you scrub the floor but leave the radioactive rag sitting in the middle of the living room, you have not actually removed the danger. The Day of Atonement operates on the exact same logic.